All right, I think we'll get going. Thank you, everybody who's joined us, and thank you to our presenters. I'll just review the format. We're going to be doing the Hangout for 30 minutes. We'll have about 15 minutes of presentation, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A and discussion with the wider group. We have three people presenting, myself, Jason Armstrong, with the Let's Talk Energy program, Ellen Pekilis from Repurposed Energy Exchange, and Gilles Gagnier from the Royal Canadian Geographic Society. If any of the viewers have any questions or comments, just on the sidebar, there's a question and answer function. Type them in, and we will get to them as they come up or at the end of the presentation, depending on the question. And wanted to remind everyone, feel free to ask your question in English and French. We will answer in the language you ask to the best of our abilities. And briefly, I'll just explain what this is for. This is for a new initiative from the Let's Talk Energy program called the Canadian Energy Literacy Network. And it's a group for people who are interested in energy education. I think nationally there are a number of groups who are doing this, but we're not a huge network of people. But we do have some challenges of geography and subject matter. So we're hoping that this group will be able to bring us together a little bit more. We can use it as a springboard for some new ideas, for some collaborative projects, and as a way of reducing some duplication in our work. So we'll get started, and here if you can hit that first slide. So really, why is energy literacy something that we're all interested in? Well, as we know, energy enables the world we live in, and the production, transmission, and consumption of energy have profound economic, social, and environmental impacts for the citizens of this country. The decisions that we make today around energy are going to span, they'll have impacts, will span decades. And around energy, there's many myths, there's a lot of misinformation, and it's quite a polarized discussion. But it's more than that. I think the urgency around energy literacy is compounded by the fact that energy is such a huge economic driver in the country. And we wouldn't be having this discussion around energy if it wasn't for the fact that energy also has pretty serious environmental consequences with the amount of carbon that we're putting into our atmosphere. So I think we all can acknowledge we're not going to stop using energy, but the way that we use energy and how we mitigate that carbon and how we also ensure economic prosperity are really going to be important discussions for Canadians. So if I asked 30 different people to define energy literacy, and everybody who I'm assuming is viewing here is interested in this, we'd probably get 30 different answers. For the Let's Talk Energy program, we've included three aspects for it. It's awareness, understanding, and engagement. So really the basis of that pyramid would be learning about energy, both its scientific principles and the social aspects of energy, and then critically thinking with that information and understanding the role that energy plays in our lives as individuals, as communities, as a country, and even globally, and then applying that knowledge in dialogue, evaluating different scenarios, and ultimately in your decision making. So there's quite a bit to that energy literacy piece. It's not simple. So why us? Why is the museum interested in this? Well, we feel that we have a good place to help lead this discussion because we're neutral. We're not interested in advancing any one point. In addition, the Museum of Science and Technology, we feel that energy is a really good fit for us. It's based in drama. It has a constantly evolving technological aspect. There's great stories as Canadians. There's conflict, there's drama, there's discovery and innovation, and it fosters our goal of increasing scientific and technological literacy for Canadians and showing how science and tech has transformed the lives of people around the world. For society in general, the transformation that's happened in the last couple of centuries has been fueled by energy. It's allowed improvements in medicine, sanitation, agriculture, education, and a lot of other fields. And to date, this transformation has been mostly fueled by fossil fuels. It's enabled human and animal-powered societies to transform into the industrialized civilization that we live in today. And so really the story of technological and human transformation has been a story of harnessing energy. And as we seek ways of promoting that prosperity to people around the world, our relationship with energy and natural resources is really going to determine how we develop in the future. So who is this for? And and do they really care? So I did a quick Google search of sort of energy protests, and you'll see there's thousands of images out there, and there's a lot of polarization in this discussion. I'd say in the last 40 years, we've gone from NIMBY, not my backyard, to bananas, build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone, to nope, not on planet Earth. And that's really not a very productive way of having this discussion of how we want to develop our resources. We talk to a lot of different people, and we kind of hear the similar refrain from lots that if only people knew. And from industry, it's really about if only people knew about the benefits energy provides, then their infrastructure would be easier to build. From government, it's really if people knew the economic impacts to provinces in the country, then people would be investing in skills development so we could train the next generation of workers. And from a lot of the environmental organizations, if only people knew the effects climate change will have long-term, people would be rethinking their relationship with energy. So I feel that everybody is looking for an audience, and often they're not interested in advancing dialogue, but more their message. So I think as energy educators, we need to do a better job of telling stories, creating discussion, and also listening. So what do I think is the end goal of this? Ultimately, we want to increase scientific and energy-related literacy. We want to increase discussion, and we want to have people feeling comfortable when they're making decisions around energy in their lives. I think also we want to see more energy prosperity. We know that energy poverty is a big factor in development around the world. And so I think globally we need to look at how we can increase access to energy, but also how we can do that with mitigating the effects of energy development. So that's not going to be an easy task. This is a serious challenge that Canadians and the whole world needs to face. And having some discussion tools and being able to have these discussions in a way that's productive as opposed to destructive is really important. And I hope that in the future, we can move this discussion from an adversarial one to one that's focused on problem solving and create a future that's bright and just and sustainable. So that's where the museums program is coming from. So Ellen, I'd like you to talk a little bit about how Energy Exchange sees this energy discussion as well.
Thanks for your comments, Jason. I've got to say that what I have to say is really, really aligned with what you just said, and I sort of don't want to cover a lot of the same ground, but I guess it's a good thing that there's probably a very high degree of alignment with our goals. So where Energy Exchange came from was a high degree of call from a whole bunch of stakeholders to raise awareness in the general public and also in specialized audiences of decision makers around concepts of Canada's energy systems with a goal of diffusing the good versus evil in the rhetoric, because it doesn't help anybody. So your point about people being very anxious to promote a message is very, very well taken. And I guess from our perspective, the goals of energy literacy are to for energy literacy to be a tool in the toolbox of coaching conservation, because there's a whole range of other levers being pushed on to drive conservation, but also to promote or be a catalyst for active and engaged and thoughtful dialogue when there's on major infrastructure planning. So as you said, the human race isn't going to be able to exist without the use of energy. Canada is in an enviable position to have a huge range of energy resources available to us. We have a very extensive infrastructure network that's created the prosperity that we have today, or has been a very integral part in creating our prosperity. And there are a range of very, very serious environmental impacts. So how do we wish to invest now for the future to replace an aging infrastructure with an infrastructure that's going to take us into the future that will facilitate both a sustainable environment and a vibrant economy. And these two things shouldn't be in opposition to each other. There's got to be a way. So the goal from our perspective of energy literacy is to provide technology neutral, non-advocacy, science-based information about a whole range of energy-related issues, just to raise people's awareness level, to be a catalyst for dialogue, to get people engaged and feeling more comfortable in that discussion. Now, are any of the slides I had available? Because we did have, like you, we don't have a fixed definition of energy literacy. We have kind of our own take on it, and it's really focused on concepts, which is a working knowledge of the main elements. Because, as you said, there are a great many different potential definitions. So our goal is that people understand energy systems, and we're really approaching things from a systems-based perspective in order to facilitate that critical thought and engagement, both in terms of people's personal use and in giving them a comfort level to engage in dialogue and very serious public issues in a thoughtful way, as opposed to a knee-jerk way of good versus evil. Can we have the next slide, please? That would be helpful. So for those of you who, some of you may be familiar with our tools, I'm going to show you how to find it in a minute, but we have a tool called the Primer, and it introduces 4 basic language elements that we think are the basic building blocks of the energy systems that we want people to know about, because they're not well understood. So what we're attempting to do is put the person, the end user, at the center of the dialogue instead of focusing on supply chain, which is where it usually goes. People usually very much focus on syncrude or supply of energy. Anyhow, we look at first amenities, which is the basic outcome that you want. The core outcomes you want is a reliable way to get lighting when you want it. That switch, the power better be there when you flick the switch. You want unlimited access to personal mobility. These are things that people want. That's the amenity they want. How they get it is via a service, which is the lighting or the car that they want. The commodity is what fuels the service that delivers the amenity, and then that traces back to an originating natural source in water or crude oil or wind or solar, etc. And so what the approach that we're taking is to try to build an awareness of those 4 sets of building blocks and how they fit together, so that people understand that when they flick a switch and they get that bill, it represents a whole range of things behind that almost geometrically expands from that little flick of the switch. Can we have the next slide, please?
So they're just reloading it there, Ellen, so we'll get that slide up in a moment.
Okay. Without seeing it in front of me, because I don't have a printout, I believe what I've given you is a screenshot of the primer and the web address so that you can find it if you want to look at it, because we expand on all these things, and I want the people viewing to know how to find it. If it's not available now, will the slides be available to anybody who might want to see them afterwards? Okay. So we've got the website that you can go to, which is www.energy-exchange.net, and then you can click on the primer button and pull up our primer. It's available in PDF form. It was produced a couple of years ago, so just so you know, we're working on a new edition. It's going to build out newer technologies like fracking that weren't as clearly focused on in the last one. And we're also going to build out some portions on energy pricing, which is a really big issue that people need to understand. Not so much what you see on your bill, but things like what affects the price of oil and what affects the price of electricity and why. These are important things for people to understand. I guess I'll leave it there, and on to Gilles and any questions that people may have.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you, Jason. We're pleased and privileged to be a part of this conversation. There's no question that energy is among the most pressing issues facing Canada today. It's not a surprise then that an organization like the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, who's dedicated to making Canada better known to Canadians and the world, specifically through a geographic lens, would be heavily engaged in ensuring Canadians have the facts they need to make informed decisions. Any kind of literacy requires a basic set of facts to understand the topic in a broad kind of a way. Then the critical thinking skills to analyze, communicate, and make informed decisions based on those facts. Jennifer Winter of the University of Calgary describes overall literacy as knowledge and behavior consistent with that knowledge. So we're sort of in the knowledge dissemination game here at Canadian Geographic to understand why we participate in energy literacy and why energy literacy is important to us as an organization. You have to start with the foundation and understand us as an organization a little bit. The RCGS was founded in 1929. Canadian Geographic has been continuously published since 1930. We have 3.5 million readers per issue of the magazine, making us the third most widely read magazine in the country. We have hundreds of thousands of Canadians who interact with us through our digital social media platforms. All of those Canadians, all of those readers rely on us for authoritative and accurate information on the kinds of topics like energy. Of course, we cover lots of other topics, but energy is a very important. Canadian Geographic Education has nearly 14,000 teacher members. Those teacher members, in the same way as our readers, they rely on us for authoritative, accurate, curriculum-based, in this case, geography materials and programs. Our heritage, you have to understand our heritage to a degree to understand why this is important to us, but our heritage and our reach we consider to be a great honor and a great privilege. But more than that, it's a great responsibility that we take very seriously. Energy has to come from somewhere. The same way, Jason, you and your colleagues are in the business of telling science stories, in a simple way, we're in the business of somewhere. Geography has been defined, and some would say more aptly described or summed up in the statement, what is where, why there, and why care. When you apply that to energy, it's pretty clear why it's an important story. We tell those stories to millions of Canadians, whether it's through our magazine or through our social media platforms, as I mentioned earlier, or our education programs. You can't possibly open a newspaper today without finding a story about energy. We're confronted with energy when we debate pipelines, when we gas up our cars, pay our hydro bills. Recently, the Bank of Canada lowered interest rates in large part as a response to the price of a barrel of oil. Energy is everywhere and energy matters. It's an extremely important topic, and one that can inspire, as you said, Jason, emotionally charged debates and also divisive discussions. We're in the process, we're in the sort of, I guess you could say that we're in the business of informing those discussions and helping them move along. Clearly, when we discuss energy, we have to consider where the resource resides, how the resources are produced and transmitted to us as end users, and then, of course, we have to take into consideration how we use the energy as users. And that speaks to Ellen's point earlier about energy as systems. You can't look at the energy debate or the energy discussion and have any kind of informed discussion about energy without thinking about every step of the system. Give you a sense of the kinds of things we've done at Canadian Geographic to try to inform Canadians. As I mentioned earlier, it's about making sure that Canadians have the information they need in order to make informed decisions. Every June, we produce what we call our annual environment issue, Canadian Geographic. In June 2012, we dedicated a feature and a poster map to the topic of energy use. In that case, it was about how do we use energy as citizens, how can we use it better. We gave our readers lots of tips and tricks on how to use better energy more wisely. We created a poster map that showed energy use per capita. So again, part of just informing the discussion. In June of 2013, we created a feature story and a poster map on how energy is produced and transmitted to us. Again, back to Ellen's point about, you can do all you want on using it better, but we have to produce it better. We have to transmit it more safely and better. And it's again the systems approach. In June of this year, our energy feature and map were dedicated to our energy reserves in our country. All of these issues, the magazine, with all of these issues, the magazine's created corresponding education resources. In fact, Canadian Geographic Education has created those resources and disseminated them through our teacher network. So again, we're having this conversation with millions of Canadians through the magazine, with thousands and thousands of teachers and tens of thousands of students. We're an energy-rich nation. It's an important topic. It's important that we understand it. It's important that as a society we're energy literate. And the role we think we play in that is to help make sure Canadians have the necessary information to make the appropriate decisions, and just to make sure that we keep the story topical and on the minds of Canadians. Jason, over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for your comments. That's great. So if anybody is watching and would like to ask a question or make a comment, tell us how you're involved with the energy education piece, you need to open up the Q&A app. You can find that in the top right corner of your screen near your username, and just select Q&A, and that'll open up the chat function if you haven't seen it. So we do have one here. How did you get into the energy literacy field? So from my perspective, the museum started this Let's Talk Energy program about 6 years ago, and I was involved with building the exhibitions that we had. And then from there, it just seemed like a really exciting topic, and I was wanted to keep working in that domain. So that's how I got involved personally. How about you, Ellen?
Just trying, is my microphone unmuted? Good. Well, I've only been with Energy Exchange for 4 or 5 months at this point. And my background was I practiced environmental law as a separate before I came here, so I already had an interest in these issues. But Pollution Probe got involved because there was a strong call in the stakeholder base, and a whole range of organizations were calling for energy literacy, and there wasn't clearly a body filling that need at that time, and so there was a range of cross-Canada consultations that led to the decision to form Energy Exchange.
Gilles, if you want to comment, either yourself or when Canadian Geographic got involved.
Sure. I've been with Canadian Geographic for nearly 15 years now. Canadian Geographic's been telling the energy story probably as far back as we've had a magazine, because it's always been important. Specifically, when we start talking about energy literacy, that seems to be something, around 2010 we started focusing more seriously on the topic of energy literacy, and we've created a number of programs as both Jason and Ellen, I'm sure you know our programs. We do Classroom Energy Diet Challenge, and that started in 2-3 years ago. We have Energy IQ program. We have a number of ways we reach out to Canadians on the subject of energy. So as far as how do we get into it, I guess in a way the magazine has always been interested in energy as a topic, the same way we've always been interested in wildlife. It seems to be, again, like Ellen was saying earlier, there's been a growing demand for good, authoritative, fair, accurate, and balanced information on energy, and of course, as a national magazine, it's a natural for us to fill that volume.
There's a question here, I believe for you, Ellen, that's specific. Is Energy Exchange part of Pollution Probe? What's the relationship?
Good question. Energy Exchange is part of Pollution Probe. It's an unincorporated division of the Pollution Probe whole. They decided to brand it separately because it has a very distinct mission from Pollution Probe. And also, frankly, because Energy Exchange has a very specific mandate to be non-advocacy, and Pollution Probe, as a separate matter, retains the right to take an advocacy position on matters where that decision is made. So our mission at Energy Exchange is technology neutral, science-based, non-advocacy information literacy.
Great. So we have a couple of questions here. How will this group measure changes in energy literacy in Canada? And that's a great question, because we all want to see advancement on this topic. Part of the challenge, as we know, is to measure that. It takes a lot of money to do these studies that are broad and across the country. And there are people working on this. Michael Moore and Jennifer Winters had done some studies on energy literacy levels a couple of years ago. I know that there's talk of doing more studies. I think there's also a group at UNB, so I think Ellen can talk about that group. So I don't think that necessarily we'll be doing it, but we're going to be looking at general energy awareness levels across the country over the coming years. Ellen, you want to speak a bit on that?
So there's a coalition of 4 universities involving New Brunswick, Calgary, Dalhousie, and Cornell in the U.S. working on an energy literacy survey which has been delivered. They haven't yet published the results of it. We were working with one of their people who is doing some very specific analysis of people's attitudes to connect value sets, personal value sets with their own personal perception of their knowledge versus their actual knowledge. Again, they're working on the data and analytics right now, and then from there, our hope is to start getting a profile of different kinds of people and their relative interest in this topic, their knowledge base, and how they want information delivered to them. So that's going to be an ongoing set of activities over the next year, and we're very, very interested in that. The measurement piece, because that's a question of an annual survey to measure baseline literacy, but the also measurement piece is how to measure the effectiveness of the energy literacy tools that we're creating. I think that will come out of the audience identification segmentation work that we're doing, which is once we understand better who we're trying to reach, and how they want the information delivered to them, in what format, then things like key performance indicators and metrics of value will fall out of that. But I think we have to understand who the people are and what kinds of information they want and how it needs to be delivered first.
Gilles, did you want to comment at all on that, about how you measure the effectiveness of what your organization is doing?
Sure. A lot of what we do is directed directly to teachers and programs that we deliver in school. So every time a teacher interacts with our program, we do exit studies. We ask them to fill in surveys. We sometimes interview them by phone. We have a Teacher Summer Institute where we bring teachers from across the country to Ottawa to discuss these topics. So we're constantly getting feedback, but mostly, of course, from the education community. The magazine, in its own way, has built-in feedback mechanisms. Of course, you can imagine when you have as many readers as we do, we hear from them often, and folks who are interested in energy are often very, very passionate. So we hear from them regularly. We haven't baselined energy literacy. It is something we're interested in. We're interested in the studies Ellen's talking about, and helping play a role in getting a better baseline. So, a year from now, 5 years from now, we can actually know what kind of impact we have.
For the next question here, the person writes, I came across a study that demonstrated our key decision makers are not informed about energy. How do you plan on engaging key politicians and decision makers on this topic? So I think that really when we look at who's doing the work, we all fit into different niches. I'd say that for the museum, our general audience is families with children. That's who are at our site, and also who accesses our website. But we use different tools for accessing different populations. For us, I don't think that is our key market. For somebody more like Pollution Probe, I think that you're much more connected to that decision maker. But I think this is where we support each other and help connect the right people and the right resources, like I said, with this small group. Would you agree, Ellen?
Yes. So in terms of our approach to energy literacy, we're trying, the public is a very big space to play. And so we're trying to figure out, again, with limited resources, who in the public are we trying to reach that can influence things. But in terms of elected officials and decision makers within both the energy creation community and the energy user community, that is another set of key audiences for us, and we have a range of very focused activities for them. So, for instance, we have a workshop series where I held a workshop for 3 levels of government to understand their energy information needs, enabling factors and barriers, so that we could start to tease out where energy literacy can help public policy be more effectively delivered and communicated to the core audiences they're trying to reach. The next one we're going to be hosting in March will be focused on key energy users in industry.
Perfect. I'm going to go to this next question. It says, we were chatting with curriculum developers in Alberta education, and some of them mentioned the term energy literacy was one they hadn't come across. So how do we ensure that energy literacy finds its way into provincial curriculum across the country? So maybe, Gilles, I'll ask you to talk about that, since you really are working with teachers and curriculum across the nation.
Sure. Canadian Geographic Education, as you say, 14,000 roughly teachers across the country. It's energy literacy. If you look up the term energy literacy, you may not actually find it written as such in the curriculum. But teaching about energy, teaching about resources, teaching about where they are, how we find them, how do we extract them, that is in a number of, it's in every curriculum across the country on some level. So part of our challenge is actually, it's twofold. The first part is to actually find where in the curriculum energy and energy topics are important, and then we tailor our activities, our programs, our lesson plans, and so on to address the particular curriculum needs. So that's one part of our work. And the other part of our work is that we work with the provincial and territorial ministries of education to ensure they're aware of the programs we have and to make sure they're. So we're trying to affect and influence curriculum at the ministerial level on the one hand, and effectively often, and of course then we're actually right down with the teachers, helping them teach the topics they need to teach.
Great, thanks a lot. I'm going to try and move through these questions since we're getting to the end of our time. One of the, Sandy here asks, we try to be technologically neutral, but we run into the problem that if we're not explicitly against something, for example, LNG development, we're perceived as being a proponent. Anybody else have this issue? And definitely as a museum and as the Let's Talk Energy program, we have had some people who perceive that, but we are pretty clear that we're not here to advocate for one source of energy over the other. We're a museum of science and tech, so we're here to talk about the science. We're here to showcase that technology and the Canadian connection. And we're providing information. We're not here to call judgment on any of these developments, any of the way that we produce or use energy. We're here to give people facts and to help them make their decisions. So, but definitely sometimes the perception can be that we should be taking a position, but I think the wider public realizes that that's not our role. Our role is really to provide information. Have either of you found you've run into that before?
Oh yeah. I share your sentiment, you know, and especially because of our connection with Pollution Pro, which has a long history of environmental advocacy in its past. A non-advocacy, technology-neutral role for energy exchange is a surprise for some. It's a position that we need to be very clear about it, and I think we could do a better job of being very, very clear about our mandate and role, and that we're not passing judgment on any form of energy. We are simply trying to provide people with a range of information about all the options.
Our experience has been the same. We're not advocates either, as you might imagine. We think our role here is to give Canadians the information they need to make better decisions. But we're also, we talk about the energy and the environment as though, sorry, the economy and the environment as though you have to choose one or the other. And that's sort of what this question is suggesting to me, right? Where the person writing in says, if you're not dramatically against something, then you're tacitly for it. That suggests that you absolutely have to take one side or the other on every single topic and point in a debate that's really complicated and really full of kind of nuances. So I think if you ask the average Canadian to choose, and you were serious and you said you have to choose the environment or the economy, they should, I think, shake their heads and say, well, it has to be both. There has to be a way that both can do better. There has to be a way that both can work together better. And I personally think the paradigm that you have to be against something and there's no room for discussion and there's no room for mutually agreeing and improving is an outdated paradigm, personally.
I agree wholeheartedly. So Steve here has a question that given limited financial resources for energy education and literacy, what are the thoughts on fostering common and complementary approaches to energy education, either regionally or nationally? And I love that question because I think that, that there is an opportunity to do that. I think that groups, there are a couple of different ways of cutting up the people who are doing that. I think the three of us who are here are really looking at energy education from a very broad approach. Of course, there's going to be others who are industry groups or associations. They're going to be looking out for their own members and interests. There's environmental perspectives they're also looking for. But I think if we can find the groups of people who are looking at it from that perspective you were both just talking about that, looking at trying to find ways of working together, I think that there is a lot of work that we can do together. I think part of it is starting with a bit of a common language of what we mean by energy literacy, about that it isn't about pitting one side against the other or economics versus environment, and that finding those groups that are out there, and I know they are across the country, that have that similar mentality and looking at how do we advance together. And I think there is definitely a regional perspective on energy. It's very different if you're looking in the East Coast, Quebec, Ontario, Alberta and the prairies, or BC. They all have very different flavors. But at the end of it, as Gilles was saying, we are an energy country, and I think that there's some value in trying to work together. What are your thoughts, each of you?
On national, so the question then is national opportunities for national approaches to energy literacy education?
Yes, and also what are our what do we think about collaborating as kind of a broader group of energy educators and having some common ground?
Yeah, I think especially in light of the fact that many of the participants in this sector we're all going to have limitations, either money or resources, people, or scoping. The more we can share baseline information and tools, the better, because in light of the general overall objectives we want to achieve. So for instance, if our market, pollution probe isn't particularly focused on kids because there's a lot of other people in that space. But what I am very interested in doing is figuring out how some of the tools that we have and are developing could be used, repurposed, may be useful to people who are surfacing those marketplaces, and that could be helpful to them, and also how the curricula for kids kids coming out of the school system, what are they learning and what are they primed for, and how do we then, if we're focused on an older age group, how do we then sort of match up so that there's a pipeline of information that is age appropriate as people leave the formal education system and have been primed by the education system, received certain kinds of information. So yes, I think it's very important to coordinate.
Yeah, I agree with that we need to coordinate, and maybe what people, what isn't obvious to people watching this is that the Museum of Science and Technology, Pollution Probe, and Energy Exchange together, and Canadian Geographic and the Royal Canadian. So the three groups represented here, we all work together on projects outside of. So this is a part of Let's Talk Energy, which is one of the museum's ventures and programs. But we work together on other things, and I think it's a good point that we need to work together. We need to be better at it. But I would also point out that there is already a lot of that happening, sort of behind the scenes.
Yeah, I agree with everything that all of you said. I think we're going to take a couple more questions. We are over time, so if people do need to drop off, we understand, but we will try and get through the last of these questions here. And this one is from Chris, asking, who are some of the leading Canadian researchers on this topic? Is there an online resource that highlights the most pertinent and current peer-reviewed articles and studies on energy literacy? So maybe, Ellen, can I start with you? Because I know that you have been working with some researchers on this exact topic.
Yeah, okay. There's a couple of things that you might want to look at in terms of energy literacy. The University of Calgary has done an energy literacy survey, I think, twice. And I don't have the URL handy, but if you Google it, you'll find it. Angus Reid has some survey material you can look at as well. The study that we were working with somebody on is done by that coalition of 4 universities I mentioned before. They haven't published yet, but it was delivered. It was delivered in November, and it was to a broad range of Canadians. So it's structured to be demographically sound against Statistics Canada demographic data, so that conclusions can be drawn about the general energy literacy across the general Canadian population. And so I would imagine they'll be publishing in the next few months. So it's just not market ready yet, but that'll be the latest on the topic. That's what I know about it by way of broad survey data.
Perfect. Gilles, do you have anything else that you'd like to add, or?
Not really. I mean, other than to echo, you know, that we read and follow the work at the University of Calgary. Jennifer Winter, in particular, is a name that comes to mind off the top of my head. But we certainly have read a number of their reports, and obviously there are others in the country who are doing this, but that's the one that comes to mind at the moment.
Yeah, one other is out of the University of Ottawa. There's a group called the Collaboratory for Energy and Environment. So it's looking at a multidisciplinary field of topics related to energy and the environment. So, but that's a great idea, Chris. Maybe we should put together a list on our website of some great researchers that are out there in the universities and publish that for other people to find.
There's also one last point on survey data. There's, if you're willing to look outside Canada, there's a researcher named Jan DeWaters in the U.S. who has done an energy literacy survey of public and middle school students.
Great. We have a question here from Jennifer. Let's assume we approve energy literacy. Then what? What change are we seeking? Can we be specific on a simple target that is consistent across the nation? So, good question. What exactly is the end goal? If there's all these different organizations, are we actually really talking about one goal, or are we talking about multiple goals? So I guess from the museum's perspective, I'll speak on their behalf, that really what we're looking for is for people to be more comfortable with the science that's around, as the science and the technology that's around energy, and they feel capable of making those decisions, and that they're making them with a good scientific base of information. So that would be our end goal. I think that it would be really nice to see more just discussion along this topic and less of the pitting of environment versus economy, but really looking at solutions of how do we make those two work together. I think any of us in this field acknowledge that that's the way the world is going to be moving forward, and needing to move into those solutions as opposed to kind of win-lose situations, but looking for win-win. What would you say, Gilles?
Well, first of all, I agree with you that from our perspective, we're a communications company, sort of in a broad sense, right? So we tell geographic stories. We want Canadians to have facts, and by having the proper facts, be able to make informed decisions. I know that sounds like, I've said that a couple of times, and it sounds like I just keep coming back to the point. In this case, when we talk about what's the outcome, that's the outcome. When we're working with kids in school, we want them to learn how important energy is, how important it is to conserve energy, how to use it better. Our Classroom Energy Diet Challenge program is actually probably a really good example here. We give teachers 25 challenges that they bring to their students, and one of them, for example, is 1 hour no power. Kids are asked to spend an hour a day at school and then subsequently at home not using any power. And then they have discussions about that, and they learn why that's important. And then across the country, this particular program has saved thousands and thousands of documented hours of people just turning the power off. And so it's an awareness that we're after. And as we become aware, and as we make small changes, you know, if you think of the Blue Box program, right? Anyone who, in today's day and age, that it's common and it's everywhere. But when it was first introduced, it was introduced through schools, and kids were coming home and saying, "Mom, Dad, we absolutely have to have a Blue Box." And it was the kids who actually sort of brought about a lot of that change. We're trying to do the same thing with energy. We're trying to make sure people are aware. We want them to know where it comes from. We want to know how it gets to them. We want to know how they can use it better. And the outcomes are multiple. So when this person says, "Can we talk about one particular outcome?" There are potentially hundreds of outcomes that come from that approach. All of them positive in our minds, and that's what that's the change we're trying to affect here at Canadian Geographic.
And Ellen, do you, from Energy Exchange's perspective?
I think in terms of outcomes, it's hard to pick just one, but at an upper level, it is very much what Jason was saying. On the part of private individuals, an increased comfort level with the science, the systems, and the options available to us as Canadians, so that they're willing to engage in a thoughtful dialogue on the topic, as opposed to just taking a yes versus no, good versus evil position on things. And also enough comfort with the science and the options that they feel a way that they can align their personal value sets with the decisions in front of them, so that they see how they, as individuals, their voices will be heard in the various public consultation processes that are available to us. I guess a second goal would be at the decision maker level in both industry and government, that they have a better understanding of each other's needs and the opportunities that are there to make better use and more productive use of the energy available to us by helping them understand each other's needs. Don't presume that because industry has very educated people with a very high level of knowledge, that energy or productive energy usage, or minimizing the amount of energy they use, or tailing off their carbon-based usage is something that is top of mind or in any way built into their planning. They're driven by a different set of drivers. So how to pull those together and effectively pulling that discussion into a profit-driven environment would be a key goal, I think.
There we go. I just wanted to point out that Kaylee has mentioned that Student Energy is going to be releasing a global energy literacy scan in mid-February. So, Kaylee, we'd love to see more of that. Make sure you broadcast it through social media to our three organizations, because I'm sure we'll be interested in seeing it, and also rebroadcasting that to all the people we're in touch with. David asks, there's a number of projects and conferences on this topic. Is there a good comprehensive list of applied energy literacy resources? I think that there's a lot of lists out there. I know that we do one on our website, letstalkenergy.ca, of different energy resources. If you're looking for school-based resources, I know that Canadian Geographic has some, another organization, Green Learning, has some. There's a lot of places that have pieces of this. I'm not sure that there is one location. So, Ellen, would you know of anyone that kind of aggregates everybody?
No, and we're trying, as we find things, we're creating just a little Excel spreadsheet. So no, I don't have the magic list either. And maybe if we put our heads together, we can have one portal where we can dump it all on and pull it together, because I'm continually finding new events, new groups, really interesting people with thoughts out there that and we're just pulling them together on a spreadsheet. I wish there was a list. We did, when they set up Energy Exchange, because I've seen the background information that went into the creation of this group, they did an analysis at that time, and they listed, I think, 70, 75 organizations. But that was 5 years ago. I think it really needs to be done again. It's not relevant anymore, So I don't have it. I wish I did.
Gilles, any comments?
No, same. We don't have that comprehensive list. Of course, the ones we're aware of, we share their information and we try to help. At our website, energyiq.canadiangeographic.ca, we have lots of resources there, but not a comprehensive list as such.
Yeah, one of the things I'm hoping to do with this group here, the Energy Literacy Network, is to try and get people who are tuning in here and are working in this field to really share what they know, because I think that each of us has a pool that we've uncovered, and that we can join all of those people up and resources like you're saying, Ellen. It'd be really great to get a current, extensive scan of what is happening out there across the country, because as much as we're plugged into certain elements, we know that there's things going on in other parts of the countries or in other sectors that we just haven't uncovered yet, and we've been at this for years. So it would be really great to see what other people are turning up. I'm going to go with these last two because we really got to get off, but what are the greatest challenges in making energy literacy relatable and interesting? To me, that's really a big challenge. It is a topic that can be quite overwhelming. So I think really what we're finding is that using less stats and statistics and figures and telling stories is the way that we're trying to move this to, and appealing to people on a bit of a gentler fashion than just a whole series of figures and stats. So that's one way. There's a couple of different approaches. What do you find, Gilles, with your programming that works best?
Well, again, it depends on whether we're talking through the magazine or through Canadian Geographic Education, because they both use different approaches, because they both have different audiences. With Canadian Geographic Education, it's only interesting and relatable if we tell stories, just like you were saying at the museum. So we tell the story of energy. We did in a recent issue, we did the 13 things we think Canadians don't know about energy. And one of them was, where does the gas you pump in your car come from, for example, depending on where you live in the country. So that's a story that everyone can relate to, but again, that's for the magazine specifically. When it comes to Canadian Geographic Education, the tools we create, they have to be equally authoritative and equally interesting and engaging as the magazine, but they have to serve a need to the teacher and to the curriculum they need to teach. So, for example, with our Energy IQ program, we have a giant floor map. It measures something like 11 meters by 8 meters. It comes to the school for a 3-week period. It's a map of Canada, and when we roll that canvas map out in the gymnasium, it's this enormous opportunity for kids to explore and learn and play in a way. But what's on the map of Canada are all the energy production and transmission facilities across the country for all of the various types of energy that we produce. And then we layer onto that discussion, so we give the teachers guidebooks and tools that they can to help them foster discussion on the map. So it becomes very relatable and very real, and it's not about stats and statistics in a textbook. It's actually about experiencing. It's about seeing, for example, where the oil sands literally where they exist in the country, and then of course you're not then surprised to see the amount of activity in the oil and gas sector around there. When you see on a map of that size the hydro capacity and the hydroelectric facilities in Quebec, it makes sense, because you see the amount of rivers and lakes that they have and where they are relative to population. So we use that's one example. We have lots of programs, but that giant floor map program allows people, kids, to look at the topic sort of both spatial, in sort of time and space, and we give the teacher the tools to foster that discussion. So again, that's 2 examples, but there's lots of ways we try to hopefully make it interesting, engaging, and relatable.
And Ellen, do you want to comment about how the energy primers tried to make that topic engaging and relatable?
Well, the energy primer is in text format. It has some graphics and charts in it that are very useful at explaining some of the systems-based connections. There are some diagrams, which I've learned in my months here, called Sankey diagrams, which show energy flow from beginning to end, which are also very graphic. But long and short of it is the primer is in book format. And one of the things we've heard is that although the material in there is really, really solid and well respected and quite broadly used and known in the field, the book format is proving challenging for people and some as a learning tool. So there's a strong call for us to create more visual, interactive online material that's chunked up a little bit more so people don't have to read a whole book. So that's something that we're going to be actively undertaking in the next year, is to try to make to take an updated version of the primer and meet some of those goals about visual, interactive, online, very heavily linked content, so people don't have to read the whole thing but find the piece they want, and then they can follow exactly the path that they wish to follow through the information.
Great. I just wanted to mention, if anyone hadn't seen, Kathy, who's with the Alberta Council for Environmental Education, has mentioned that there's an Alberta database of resources. So it's called Learning for a Sustainable Future, and has resources for Rethink database for educators, so tools for educators. So that's great. Thank you, Kathy. And just finally, how can somebody who isn't working in the industry get involved? I think if you're interested, I think a great way of starting that is joining some, if you're on any social media. So I know that probably each of these organizations has a Facebook page, has a Twitter account, and there's really ways of just learning more, and also beginning to voice your opinion on those formats. It's a really great way. It's quick, it's responsive, and it can be kind of at your own speed. So I think that's, from my perspective, a great way of plugging in. Anybody have another comment?
Sounds good. I'll just be repeating what you said. Yeah, sounds great to me.
Okay. I'm going to just tell you the next Hangout. So this is a part of a monthly series for anybody who is watching. We're going to be doing this the last Thursday of every month. The next one will be on February 26th. And that's going to be a bit more of an Energy 101 of where the Canadian energy system is. For the whole Google Hangout, so we're just going to have one person on. It's a huge topic in a short amount of time, so I think keeping one speaker will be best. And he'll also be accompanying with some slides and some visuals, and then we'll open that up for discussion. So we'll be sending out an invitation to everybody who is on this one. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for your questions. Thank you to our two presenters. That was great.